He's an accomplished folk artist.
Whatever his mind sees, he can just tell his hands to do.
Johnny's one hell of a cook. Yeah, gravy on everything.
Just moments ago, breaking news shook fans of Barnwood Builders everywhere. Reports are flooding in that investigators have searched the private property of Johnny Jett, the show's beloved craftsman known for his humor, artistry, and mysterious charm. But this time, the reason behind the search wasn't about reclaimed wood or restoration projects. According to eyewitnesses in West Virginia, officials were seen entering Johnny's secluded log home late last night and spending hours in the basement before emerging with boxes sealed in evidence tape. Sources close to the investigation say what they found down there isn't good. For years, Johnny's fans have celebrated his creativity, his old soul wisdom, and his deep respect for history. But now it seems there's another side to his story, one that was buried deep beneath his own home. Could this discovery expose something darker about the man who spent his life preserving the past? Or is it a misunderstanding gone too far? What's certain is that the quiet woods around Johnny Jett's cabin aren't so quiet anymore. Before we dive into what was uncovered and why authorities are still stationed on his property, make sure you subscribe and stay tuned, because what comes next might just change everything we thought we knew about one of America's most admired craftsmen. To truly grasp why this discovery is shaking so many people, you first need to understand who Johnny Jett really is. Born in the hills of Kentucky in 1949, Johnny grew up with a hammer in one hand and a sketchbook in the other. His passion for old barns wasn't just about wood. It was about preserving stories, honoring the past, and giving forgotten structures new life. When Barnwood Builders first aired, Johnny instantly stood out. He wasn't loud or flashy like other TV personalities. He was quiet, thoughtful, and often seen smiling behind his long beard while sketching something only he could see. To fans, he was the heart of the show, the man who turned decaying wood into pieces of art. But beneath that easygoing charm, Johnny carried a heavy past. Friends say he rarely spoke about his personal life. He'd lost close family members, and there were times he'd disappear for days into the mountains, saying he needed time with the old souls. What did that mean? No one ever asked, not even his closest castmates. Over time, Johnny became more reclusive, working later hours and spending more time alone in his basement workshop. To the world, it was just another part of his creative process. But those who know him best now admit there was something about that basement he never wanted anyone to see. And that's exactly where authorities have focused their attention. For years, Johnny Jett's property in Greenbrier County was a place of calm, a slice of Appalachian peace where the hum of saws and the smell of cedar filled the air. But a few weeks ago, things began to change. Locals started noticing strange activity after dusk. Trucks, unmarked and coated in mud, were seen pulling into Johnny's long gravel driveway well past midnight. The engines were always cut before the headlights went out, and shadowy figures were seen carrying old crates, rolls of canvas, and bundles of lumber toward the back of his property. Neighbors who knew Johnny's work habits said it was unusual. He'd never been the type to work at night, let alone keep company with strangers. One neighbor, a former construction worker, claimed he heard metallic thuds echoing from underground for several nights in a row, followed by the muffled sound of drilling. Another reported catching a glimpse of flickering lantern light beneath the basement window, long after Johnny had supposedly gone to bed. Rumors began spreading fast through the small town. Some thought Johnny was restoring another historic cabin in secret, possibly for a private client or a personal project. Others whispered that he'd stumbled upon something valuable: old Civil War relics, or hidden artifacts from one of his many reclamation trips. But there were darker theories too. A few believed he was hiding something that had nothing to do with wood at all. That fear only grew when, one evening, a loud metallic clang echoed across the valley, followed by silence. The next morning, Johnny was seen outside, covering a patch of dirt near the back of his workshop with new planks. He looked pale, distracted, and, according to one local, not like himself. Days later, 2 government trucks arrived, one marked with the county's Environmental Safety Division, the other unmarked but flanked by uniformed men. They spent nearly 3 hours examining the land before entering the basement with specialized equipment. Witnesses reported hearing voices through the open windows, short, tense exchanges between officials and Johnny. "You can't take that," one of them allegedly said. "It's not yours anymore." After that night, the property was cordoned off. Yellow tape appeared around the workshop, and Johnny stopped showing up at his usual lumber suppliers. Fans online noticed he hadn't appeared in recent Barnwood Builders episodes either. What was going on beneath that home in the woods? A secret project gone wrong? A discovery he didn't want anyone to find? Whatever it was, it had drawn serious attention. And according to one anonymous insider connected to the show's production, this wasn't the first time Johnny's basement had raised concern. The source hinted that years ago, during filming, producers were told never to shoot near the lower level of his house. No one questioned it then, but now everyone's wondering what was really hiding under the man who made a living bringing history back to life. When investigators finally descended into Johnny Jett's basement, what they uncovered left even the most experienced officials stunned. The entrance was narrow, almost hidden behind old planks and barrels stacked to the ceiling, as if intentionally concealed. Beneath the floorboards, they discovered a passage, hand-dug, lined with old barn beams, and supported by rough-cut timbers that looked centuries old. The air was thick with dust and the scent of aged oak. As they ventured deeper, they found more than just tools or supplies. There were rows of wooden crates, each labeled with handwritten dates and locations. Some labels matched restoration sites featured on Barnwood Builders, while others listed places the crew had never filmed. When the crates were opened, authorities found rotted sketches, broken tools, and fragments of barn doors with initials burned into the wood. One crate contained rusted nails and a faded photograph of Johnny standing beside an unknown man in front of a half-collapsed barn. Another held what appeared to be carved memorial plaques, each etched with a name and year. Investigators described the scene as half workshop, half shrine. In the far corner stood an old workbench covered in dust, littered with carving tools, jars of varnish, and melted candles. Above it, faint carvings covered the concrete wall. Phrases like, "They built themselves into time," and "Hands never die." But the most chilling discovery was found behind a sealed iron door that had been welded shut from the inside. After forcing it open, they entered a chamber barely large enough to stand in. The walls were scorched black, the ceiling covered in soot. Inside were decaying fragments of wood and metal, arranged in what looked like a collapsed framework. Experts identified it as part of a barn truss, one that appeared to have been involved in a fire. There were charred photographs pinned to the beams, showing what looked like an old restoration site. When one of the photos was cleaned, investigators recognized it immediately. It was from an early Barnwood Builders project that had mysteriously been canceled before airing. The discovery sent shockwaves through the team and the network alike. What was Johnny doing with burnt remains of an unknown barn hidden under his home? And why had he sealed them away like something meant never to be seen again? Some believe it was guilt. Others think it was grief. But everyone agrees. Whatever was buried beneath Johnny Jett's home wasn't just wood and nails. It was history he couldn't let go of. As officials began cataloging what they had found, attention quickly turned to a group of heavy crates stacked along the far wall, untouched by dust as if they'd been recently moved. Each was sealed tight with metal clasps and marked with faded black ink. Dates, initials, and mysterious tags like Project Zero, Marlinton Site, and Do Not Open. When investigators pried the first one open, the room fell silent. Inside were reels of old film, corroded with age but clearly labeled with episode numbers and handwritten notes in Johnny's distinct cursive. One reel read, Pilot. Footage. Crew Test, 2012. Another said, Personal Recordings, Unreleased. As technicians carefully inspected the film, they found footage never seen by the public. Behind-the-scenes clips showing early Barnwood Builders projects long before the show ever aired. But mixed in with them were darker recordings. Grainy, handheld shots of collapsed barns, wrecked beams, and moments of distress among the crew. One video abruptly cut off after a violent tremor and a shout, leaving investigators wondering what really happened during those early days of production. The second crate was even stranger. It contained several wooden artifacts burned around the edges, with inscriptions carved into them. Save the frame, never rebuild, and gone too soon. One piece had a date burned in 2009. That year matched the rumored timeline of a restoration accident the network never discussed publicly. Officials also found a ledger filled with Johnny's handwriting, entries describing sites they never filmed, towns they never visited, and personal notes about returning what was taken. Each note was written as though Johnny was speaking to someone no longer alive. One entry, dated 7 years ago, read, It wasn't the barn I was trying to save. It was the man who built it. Another said, If I rebuild it, he'll live again. The emotional weight of the writings revealed a side of Johnny no one on television ever saw. A craftsman haunted by the lives tied to the structures he restored. But the final crate was what left everyone unsettled. It contained a single object wrapped in linen, a small wooden sculpture shaped like a heart, cracked through the center. Beneath it, a note written in trembling ink read, This was the last one I couldn't finish. It was signed with just the letter J. From that moment on, investigators no longer saw the basement as a crime scene. It was something else entirely. A memorial. A vault of grief. A hidden sanctuary of memories carved in wood and loss. Still, the question lingered. Why seal it off? Why keep it buried for so long? Some believe Johnny feared misunderstanding. Others think he simply couldn't bear to face what those crates reminded him of. Whatever the truth, the discovery painted a haunting picture of a man whose hands built beauty, but whose heart never healed from what the wood carried within it. When news of the basement discovery reached the Barnwood Builders crew, the silence was deafening. Mark Bowe, the team's leader and Johnny's longtime friend, refused to give interviews, releasing only a short statement saying, Johnny's heart has always been in the right place. But behind the scenes, something felt off. Production insiders reported that communication between the network and the cast abruptly stopped. Scheduled filming dates were postponed, social media posts deleted, and older episodes featuring Johnny began quietly disappearing from the streaming catalog. Crew members who had worked with Johnny for years claimed they'd been instructed not to comment publicly about the investigation or mention his name during promotional appearances. One insider even revealed that the network's legal team flew in within hours of the discovery to secure all original Barnwood Builders footage from the early years, specifically episodes that never aired. fans began noticing strange inconsistencies. Johnny's scenes were being trimmed, his quotes removed from highlight reels, and archived photos showing him working alone near his basement workshop vanished from official pages overnight. Meanwhile, online forums exploded with speculation. Some viewers believed the network was covering up a safety violation or an old tragedy connected to one of the barns Johnny restored. Others argued the silence proved the findings were deeply personal, something too painful or private to broadcast. A former producer anonymously claimed there had been an incident years ago that nearly shut down the show, and that Johnny took the blame to protect someone else on the team. Whether that's true remains uncertain, but the sudden erasure of his name from network material speaks volumes. By the following week, production vans stopped visiting Johnny's property, and filming for the next season went on indefinite hold. The once tight-knit crew, who called Johnny the soul of the series, now avoided interviews altogether. Even Mark Bowe, normally outspoken and warm, was visibly shaken during a rare public appearance. When asked about Johnny, his voice cracked as he said, "Some stories ain't ours to tell." Those 7 words hit fans harder than any official statement ever could. Whatever happened beneath that basement wasn't just about hidden wood. It was about a friendship tested, a legacy questioned, and a silence that spoke louder than words. Days after the investigation, when officials finally cleared part of Johnny Jett's basement for inspection, a shocking discovery was made in a sealed-off alcove no one had noticed before. Hidden behind a collapsed beam was what experts now call Johnny's most personal creation. A massive, unfinished sculpture carved directly into the earth and stone of his basement wall. The piece stood nearly 8 feet tall, depicting a sprawling oak tree with its roots spreading into the ground. But as investigators looked closer, they realized those roots weren't ordinary carvings. They were faces. Dozens of them. Some smiling, others solemn, each etched with haunting precision. The details were so lifelike that experts identified a few of the faces as people who had once appeared on Barnwood Builders, and others as figures from photos found in the sealed crates, individuals tied to barns Johnny had restored, or families who'd once owned them. It was as if he'd immortalized every soul connected to his life's work into the wood itself. At the tree's base were several words carved in block letters. "They live through wood." Beneath it lay a smaller inscription in Johnny's handwriting. "Hands that build don't die, they remember." Authorities described the sculpture as both beautiful and unsettling, an eerie mix of artistry and obsession. Even more chilling, melted candles and burnt incense surrounded the base, suggesting Johnny had spent nights down there working in silence, almost in ritual. The deeper they searched, the more personal it became. A shelf beside the sculpture held small trinkets, old watches, glass marbles, a single pocket knife, and photos of barns long since torn down. Some objects were labeled with initials and dates, others left nameless, like offerings to memory itself. One investigator said it felt less like a crime scene and more like stepping into someone's soul. The emotional energy in the room was heavy, suffocating even. What once appeared to be secrecy now felt like devotion. Johnny wasn't just restoring wood, he was preserving the spirit of every place he touched. But the question remained: what drove him to create something so haunting, and why keep it hidden for decades? Some believe it was grief, others call it guilt, but all agree on one thing. That sculpture told a story of a man burdened by remembrance, a man who gave everything to keep the past alive, even as it consumed him. When the dust finally settled and the frenzy around his property began to fade, Johnny Jett broke his silence in a private interview that stunned everyone who heard it. With trembling hands and a voice heavy with emotion, he finally revealed the truth behind the hidden basement and the eerie discoveries inside. Johnny admitted that the space was never meant to be secret out of guilt or fear. It was meant to be sacred. After losing his brother, his closest friends, and even crew members who had shared his early restoration days, Johnny began collecting fragments from every site he worked on. Each piece of wood, he said, belonged to someone's story. If I left it behind, it felt like I was leaving them behind too. What investigators had mistaken for a hidden chamber of relics was, in his mind, a memorial, a place where he could keep alive the people and places time had forgotten. He described the sculpture found in the alcove as his Tree of Souls, a living tribute to the lives woven through his craft. The faces carved into it weren't chosen at random. They were the faces of those who had taught him, helped him, or inspired him, immortalized in oak and ash. But when asked why he'd sealed it off and stopped speaking about it, Johnny's voice cracked. He explained that the weight of loss had grown unbearable. The more barns he rebuilt, the more ghosts he carried with him. The night he sealed the door, he said he stood in the basement for hours, candlelight flickering across the wood, whispering the names of everyone he'd ever lost. "I wanted to stop the pain," he said softly, "but I couldn't destroy what they'd become part of." His confession wasn't one of wrongdoing, it was of heartbreak. He admitted he'd isolated himself not because of shame, but because he couldn't bear the world misunderstanding his grief. When authorities questioned the crates, Johnny told them each one was a memory capsule, filled with relics from barns he couldn't let go of. Handmade nails, splintered hinges, even the ashes of burned beams he'd promised to restore, but never could. To him, the basement was never a hiding place. It was a place of remembrance, a private chapel of time. Yet, officials deemed it unsafe due to decay and mold, forcing Johnny to seal it permanently. The day he did, witnesses said he stood outside in silence for nearly an hour, staring at the ground, whispering a single sentence to himself. "They're home now." And with that, the man known for saving history became part of it himself. A craftsman haunted not by secrets, but by love too deep for words. Today, Johnny Jett's name carries a weight unlike ever before, a blend of admiration, sorrow, and deep respect. What began as a shocking discovery beneath his home has now become a hauntingly beautiful story about memory, loss, and the power of creation. After his confession, fans who once feared the worst began to see him in a different light. They realized the man behind the beard and steady hands wasn't hiding from justice, he was hiding from pain. The basement that once sparked investigation is now sealed, protected by local authorities, but spoken of like a legend among locals. Some say that at night, when the wind moves through the trees around Johnny's cabin, you can hear faint echoes of hammer strikes, as if the spirits he honored still linger in the wood. Since the ordeal, Barnwood Builders has quietly shifted its tone, airing tribute segments celebrating Johnny's art and philosophy. The remaining crew often quotes his famous line, "Everything old has a story. You just have to listen." Fans across the country have taken to social media, sharing clips of his work, photographs of barns he restored, and messages of gratitude for the man who taught them to see beauty in decay. Though Johnny rarely appears publicly now, his impact has never been stronger. Craft schools, restoration programs, and even community wood shops have begun dedicating their workshops in his honor, calling them Jett Rooms, where creators are encouraged to preserve forgotten stories just as he did. But for those who knew him personally, the story carries deeper meaning. They describe him as a man who gave so much of himself to his craft that the line between wood and soul began to blur. He once told a friend, "When I build, I'm not just raising walls, I'm raising memories." That truth defines his legacy. Even the officials who searched his basement later admitted they found no crime, only grief preserved in art. In their report, one line stood out more than any other. This was not a place of secrecy. It was a place of remembrance. And perhaps that's the truest image of Johnny Jett. A man who saw life in old wood, who built monuments to the forgotten, and who carried the stories of countless lives in the calluses of his hands. As time passes, his legend only grows, not because of fame or fortune, but because he reminded the world that every mark, every scar, every grain of wood tells a story. And somewhere beneath that West Virginia soil, sealed forever in silence, those stories still rest, watched over by the man who refused to let them die.